All right, it looks like it's 5, so we're going to go ahead and start. Welcome. This is Bridget Sullivan Mermel from Sullivan Mermel, Inc. This is our webinar. We watch the news, so you don't have to. Let's see. If you've got questions during the presentation, please send them to luke@sullivanmermel.com. And if you've got any audio problems or your audio isn't working great, you can call us back at 650-479-3208. And the meeting number is 628-833-168. All right, let's start in with our presentation. So here are the basic topics that we're going to cover. Like, how do you feel about what's going on? How do we recommend that you think about your finances? And so with that thought opportunity, we want to set a framework, a mind framework for how to think about this, and then start answering questions based on that. So we want to give you a thought system to think, how to think through this stuff, and then say, okay, what are the opportunities? And what can you take advantage of? What are the risks, and what do you probably want to avoid? And then there's some ways that we can infuse some greater meaning into the crisis that we've got at hand right now. So, all right, so let's get going on first. How do you feel about what's going on? So the first question is how or when is there fight or flight kind of adrenaline response activated during this crisis? So everybody's got this reaction. It's not a bad thing to happen. I think that the three-brain approach can really help us make sense of what's going on. So the three-brain approach is a way of simplifying our brain systems to say we've got 3 types of processing. The first type of brain, like our reptile brain, is really the fight or flight part, the sensation, arousal regulation, initiate responses. Then we've got a kind of a rewards and satisfaction, starting to have some relationships, but then really a more thinking, planning, holding down the impulses is more the third type of brain system. And so the reptile brain doesn't really help our finances that much. I mean, money was really created after the reptile brain, more of a primate brain. So we all have the reptile or fight or flight responses, but if we can use our higher planning to process what's going on, we generally will have better results in this. That's not to ignore how we're feeling. So, sorry about that. So we want to recognize how we're feeling as well. And recognize that other people are feeling different things that we might be feeling too, and be able to help them with it. So I want to use an example. One time when I was newly married, we had a fire. I got up to work out in the morning. I put my tea on, and a fire started on the stove. And it was about 5:30 in the morning. And my first response was to wake up my husband, which was actually a good response. And he was shocked too, and he was from a dead sleep. And he came down, and we looked at the situation. And the first thing you did is turn off the stove. And it turned out that he had some batteries that he had on the electric stove. I didn't realize that because, I had only moved in there recently, and I had turned on the wrong burner for my tea, and that started those on fire. So we actually, when we turned off the electric stove, that helped matters quite a bit. And then we started getting the flames out and opening the door and looking for the way to put it out, but we didn't actually end up needing that. So that was the first response of like, what am I going to do first? Run upstairs and make sure that my husband's okay. that was a good idea. But then coming down and saying, okay, how are we going to put this thing out? That made a lot of sense too. So I give that example because it's a vivid example I think people can relate to about, like, we all have fight or flight. It's not like we don't have that. And sometimes it comes up with finances. And this might be happening to you or it might be happening to somebody you know. It's really interesting to me is that sometimes it surprises people. Like they've been had a lot of equanimity about their finances for years, and then something like this happens, and they might have been fine during the mortgage crisis, and fine after 9/11, and fine during the 90s when, you know, there's been other upsets, but then all of a sudden now it's bugging them. Or, you know, I remember talking to somebody in their 80s, and it had never bugged them before, but all of a sudden they're in their 80s and bugged them. So it can change over your lifetime, and it's not a static reaction. And so then it can really surprise you. Okay. So here, the thing I want you to think about, this is going to be kind of one layer that we're thinking about when we put all these things together, is what is your anxiety level now? Kind of, what are the symptoms? So low anxiety, symptoms you might not even notice. High anxiety, a good marker of that is waking up in the middle of the night thinking about finances. Psychology, if you're not noticing anything now, it could be that you're blocking out financial thoughts and maybe you should be thinking about it a little bit more. I don't know for sure. You have to evaluate your own situation. High anxiety, kind of a fight or flight, and you can feel your adrenaline is activated. General recommendations are, in any situation, try to make a plan. And now the plan is going to look different if you're in a low anxiety or a high anxiety. And at the end of this presentation, we'll talk about what are the plans, what are the action plans that might be appropriate in the different situations. That's where we're going to end up. It's like, okay, what's my plan? How am I going to take this? This is an interesting presentation to do because we've got people of all different sophistication levels on the call. And so I'm going to try to I'm going to try to do my best to address everybody and give everybody a little bit to work with. So if it goes over your head, I will not be over your head the whole time. I'll come back down. All right, so first let's start with the fundamentals. So the fundamental what? So these are the first things that everybody should be thinking about with their finances. And so you want to be thinking during this situation is like, okay, let me check in with the basics. It's like when I play tennis, if I'm not hitting a shot right, I want to do things like check my footing and check my grip and check how my core is moving and watch the ball. So, you know, those are basic elements, and every profession has them, and finances have them too. So let's look at the basics and make sure that we've got those all right. So fundamental one, are you saving 10% of your income? Most of the other fundamentals flow from this because it's going to be, what are you doing with this 10% that you're saving? All right, so the first part is set up your emergency fund. I like to recommend you put it in something that's easily accessible, like a Capital One or Ally. So percentage of your income in the emergency fund, one person stable job, 10%. If you're self-employed or think you might get laid off, 20% of your annual income in the emergency fund. So if you have $100,000 in income, one person stable job, $10,000. Self-employed or think you're going to get laid off, $20,000. Now, I think one of the questions that people might have is, okay, I did get laid off. Do I still save 10% of my income? Well, it kind of depends on if you're covering your expenses or not. As soon as you have income again, you need to adjust your expenses so that you can, again, save 10%. And that is the number one basics of finance. The next thing is, how's your triple whammy fund? So we've got our emergency fund first, and we've got a triple whammy fund second. So a triple whammy fund is for when 3 bad things happen at once. For example, the 3 bad things that can happen at once: someone close to you dies, an economic downturn, and a natural disaster all happening at once. Now you can see right now, and it's the same thing with when natural disasters strike, how right now we might really want a triple whammy fund, and how the current circumstances set people up so that you could easily see how people might be getting into a triple whammy, or you might be getting into a triple whammy. So you want to have money set aside for that. Okay, so a little bit more about our triple whammy money. We want to have 20% of your annual income, more if you're a landlord. So if you own rental property, you want to have more in your triple whammy fund. For example, if you have $10,000 or $100,000 in income, that means you've got $20,000 for your triple whammy fund. This is in addition to your 10% to 20% emergency fund, so the total would be $30,000 to $40,000. Okay, so where do you remember our emergency fund? We said goes into a Capital One or an Ally account, right? Those are just examples of high interest savings account. I'm not touting those over other ones or other bank accounts or custodians, but those are just examples. So what about the triple whammy fund? On that, I have 2 options. The first is if your attitude is, I like to spend. So I actually put myself in this category. If I am making $100,000 a year and I have $40,000 in an emergency fund, the next time I go to make a big purchase like a car, I'll look at that and go, oh, I'll temporarily for those 2 weeks forget that that's actually what I really need for the whole thing, and I'll spend part of it because it's just kind of more than I really feel like I need. So what works is if I keep my triple whammy fund as part of my retirement account, and then I have that, but I invest it conservatively. So in my retirement account, I have a short-term bond fund or a bond fund, depending on what my 401k looks like, so that I know that I won't have to sell other investments at an inopportune time if there's a downturn. And that money, it's not going to go up greatly, but it should be there if I need it. Okay, so that's me. But a lot of people also, and this, I've added this option because of working with people. There's a lot of people that I work with that say, I don't want to goof around with that. I really just want to keep it in my Capital One account. I'm not going to spend it. It makes me feel good to have it there. So they just keep it in their Capital One account or their Ally account. So that is a triple whammy fund. Okay. So again, what do we do right now? What are opportunities? Make sure you're saving 10% of your income. Do you have adequate savings? How's your triple whammy account? Other fundamentals to check. Have you paid off your credit cards? Do you have housing decisions to make? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then the last fundamental, we're not going to get into it too much today, but I will mention that this is also another fundamental is invest in yourself. Schooling, coaching, therapy, all of those done right pay off big time. So those are great investments in yourself. That is a high meaning investment because you're helping improve yourself. Also, just so you know, your basic adequate savings account, that just having an adequate savings account, 10% in your savings, that first emergency fund, one study calculated that increased people's happiness 10%, just that. And you can get another 4% with having a little extra money. Now, that might not seem like a lot to some people, but there's a whole movement of trying to increase your happiness by 10%. I mean, that's actually kind of hard to do. So just having adequate savings account gives you a nice happiness boost. You might take it for granted once you have it, but take the time now to appreciate it. And then again, the meaning part here is the school and coaching therapy. One time I was reading a article by Jane Smiley, who's a writer, and it was about taking a bath. I don't know why she wrote about this, but she wrote about taking a bath, and she said, like, when you get in the tub, if you happen to have cleaned the tub yourself, take a minute to appreciate how it looks and that you did this work. And that's what I want to invoke here on the Adequate Savings account. You might, when I'm taking a shower or taking a bath, if I clean the tub myself or the shower myself, I don't necessarily look around and say, that feels good. I'm glad I did that. But it does help you. It makes you feel good. If you just notice, like, that savings account, it's a small thing, but it makes me feel good. Okay. All right. So we've checked in on the fundamentals. Now let's look a little deeper. Investing. Okay. So one of my major suggestions for people right now is, especially if you're kind of anxious about the stock market, is do a quick net worth statement for yourself and what does it look like right now. So, and what I would recommend is it might be more complex than this or more basic than this, but sorting it out this way: savings account, just your regular emergency fund; retirement accounts, other if you've got other; fair market value, less mortgage, your net worth. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more as we go along. But one of the reasons that I think it really helps is because you can see that even if your retirement account went down by quite a bit, say it went down by $50,000, so that would be losing 25 or 30% of the value, that it's still, sorry about that. It's still not going to change your total net worth as much as it might seem like when you're watching the news. So I encourage you to look at your total net worth and not just your retirement accounts, and not just one account. Look at all the accounts. All right. And then next, investing, functional asset allocation. So we want to think about I'm going to give credit to Burt Whitehead for this. First of all, he's influenced my thinking on this tremendously, on this, but also on the triple whammy fund. That is his terminology, and totally just use his methodology for a lot of my thinking on financial planning. But this is what he came up with here is very interesting, and you can really see the power of it in times like that. He coined functional asset allocation. He said the different types of investments have different functions. So savings and treasury strips protects against deflation because their treasury strips, for instance, they say I buy them at a certain amount, and then they say in 5 years or 10 years or whatever the due date is, they will get you an X amount of money. So they're safe. They don't care what's going on in the world. They're going to pay you back. This is what we use for people who are retired. So one of the questions we got was, how do I retire, or can I retire? We use a lot of treasury strips because then you've got and CDs, because then you've got your cash flow. We like to have your cash flow for the next 15 years all laid out for you. So then if you're thinking about, what is it now, 2020? So if you're thinking, what money am I going to need in 2035? It's a lot easier to handle than it's a lot easier to watch the news if you're not thinking if you're not worried about any cash flow issues until 2035. So that's how you retire now. Real estate with a mortgage is what protects against inflation. And mutual funds or exchange-traded funds made up of stocks are long-term growth. Now, real estate with a mortgage, the reason that protects you against inflation is because real estate is generally either your biggest expense or your second biggest expense, and so you're fixing it. and you fix it, and then if inflation goes up, you just keep paying the same amount that you got whenever you got your mortgage. If inflation goes down, you refinance and you get a cheaper mortgage. So that's how real estate with a mortgage protects you against inflation. And then stocks, again, the word long-term growth is key here, because they may grow in the short term as well, but what we're really looking for is long-term growth. Okay, right now is a great time to retire. So you wouldn't think it would be, but actually it could be a great time to retire. Why is that? You'll use realistic numbers, so you won't be, and then hopefully it'll quite possibly be better than you expect. And you can still set up your bond ladder and set up safe income for the next 15 years. Why to invest in stocks? So we got a question about investing in precious metals and commodities. So here is the theory why to invest in stocks. You want to invest in adding value to something else. So for example, when you have real estate, you take a pile of bricks and a piece of land, and you invest in it, and you make it into something that people would pay more for than just the basic two elements of it. So you're adding value. And with stocks, you're investing in a company, you're taking people and you're adding value to them. So for instance, Google brought together people, innovative people, create a company, it adds value to people. There's more than the component parts. Commodities, at best, you got lithium, which is necessary for, the battery business. Or, so at best, it seems to me that you've got a component part that people need more than you would have expected. But in its base, it's not something that you can invest in and add value to. It's just going to sit there. So that's why I'm not as interested in commodities as I am in stocks, real estate, et cetera. That's not to say there's no purpose for it for anyone, but we're just working with regular people on their basic financial plans and not getting too esoteric. So we typically stick with more of the basics. Other questions that we're getting is when to rebalance. So rebalance your portfolio. Now, here I'm going to point out to you, this is about 20 to almost 25 minutes into our presentation, and now we're talking about reinvesting your portfolio. That's because reinvesting, it's easy. Sorry about that. That's because the other elements have a higher payoff. Rebalancing your portfolio once a year is about right. And actually, a lot of the experts say less than that might be okay too, like once every 2 years. More than once a year doesn't seem to really add anything extra. Just keep plowing 10% in like usual. It's like you're getting other investments on sale. If you want to invest additional funds, if you have them, do it when you get the nerve. We have been waiting for lower volatility. So let me talk about that a little bit. So the stock market goes up and down, up and down. We've been waiting for some indicators, and Luke, I'm going to ask you about this in a second, to indicate that the volatility is a little lower, because what Bert says is don't try to catch a falling knife. So we've been waiting for the stock market to calm down a little bit before making moves, but we're just about ready, either tomorrow or probably early next week, to start doing some to feel that the volatility's calmed down, and we'll start trading. And Luke is going to come on in a second, and he'll give us a little bit more detail on that. It can be hard to. Again, we want to act, both because we want opportunity, but also if we're fearful. And so it can be, we can think, okay, this is about the stock market. I want to act on the stock market now. but the more boring plotting actions end up generally paying off better. So I just want to make clear on the emergency fund triple whammy 401k. So let's say you are saving 10% and you're wondering, what should I do with that? The first priority would be make sure your emergency fund is set up and full. The next priority would be triple whammy fund. Third priority would be 401k. But again, remember that there can be some overlap between your triple whammy and your 401k. They can be in the same if that's that choice that you've made. So, and if you get a match from your employer, it's like the 401k more. But I really, especially in times like these, make sure your emergency fund is good to go, and you're going to feel better and be in a better space in case something happens. Okay, Q&A. So I'm going to open up Luke. This is a first section that we're going over. And so we wanted to go over a whole bunch of questions that people have had. So go ahead, Luke.
Absolutely. Do you want me to talk a little bit more about what we're doing to think about volatility first?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Sure. So what we decided to do is, when we were talking about the different strategies we do with clients, so things like tax loss harvesting, where we sell.
We'll talk about it in a second, by the way.
You're talking about it soon? Okay. So
we'll talk about tax loss harvesting, but it also it dovetails with volatility too.
Right, exactly. So so strategies like that, which we'll get to in a second. What we decided to do is, to make sure that we didn't end up sitting out of a really good day of gains as the market started to recover or anything like that. We decided to wait until volatility metrics were where we felt was comfortable. So the one that we specifically decided to use for this situation was the 14-day average true range. And what that means is it basically tracks in the last 2 weeks on an average day how far up or down the stock market has gone. And so obviously, when the market was going down a lot and started to come back up a lot, the average true range was really high. And like Bridget said, it started to calm down to a level where we are getting really close to being more comfortable with doing some trading and not being worried about, the market going up a really large amount in a day where we are sitting out of it. And with that, let's get into a couple of questions. So, kind of on what we were just talking about, what markers will signal stabilization in the market such that I can feel good about putting more cash in?
So I think we tried to just answer that question. So we're talking about the
average true range.
What you said? Yeah.
Average true range.
I think that right now you can kind of see what it's been like and sort of what it's been like in the last couple of weeks. It's been, if you're somebody that watches market pretty much, you can see it's a lot calmer. But I think a lot of people still feel like it might move, but it's kind of calmed down from moving at the moment. So it might get active again, but it's calmed down at the moment. And again, what we're trying to do, we're not trying to say the market's never going to go down again, or it's not going to take another big. We're not trying to time the market and say, okay, it's not going down again. What we're trying to do is not sell things, then buy a few days later and have a big market change in between those two that is unfavorable for clients. That's what our goal is. So, it's hard if you buy something and then the next day it just tanks. That's really what we're trying to do, is avoid buying in a market where it's just very up and down. We're not trying to say that it's not going to go down again, and there won't be more tax loss harvesting opportunities later in the year. We're just trying to have it be calmed down, and we're getting there. And I think that you can see if the market seems stable for the next few days, we're going to be going ahead.
All right. Next question. What should I have done in terms of reallocating my portfolio 2 months ago to avoid taking such a big hit?
So the biggest things that you wanted to do are look at, do I have my emergency fund and do I have my triple whammy fund? It's not trying to anticipate the market's going to tank in 2 months. So for the person that asked this question, my recommendation is to look at your total net worth statement and not just your retirement accounts or wherever you have your stocks and mutual funds. So that's my recommendation, is to look at everything. And if you feel stressed out, like this whole stock market thing that's caused you more anxiety, realize that, okay, maybe I should take a little bit less risk and rebalance my portfolio for less risk. But that doesn't mean get out of all stocks. That just means think through, what do I need? What of this money might I need now, and what might I need in 15 years? And if I don't need it for 15 years, gee whiz, I think you should I think it should be in the stock market.
All right, very good. And we'll do one more question right now. What should we be doing that we're not obviously doing? Obviously not panicking, staying calm, but are there things that we should be doing as we wait for the recession or depression to come?
So that's what I really, the way seeing that question was one of the reasons why I went through the triple whammy and the emergency fund recommendations. So you want to look at those. And a lot of people, their job seems stable and now it doesn't seem as stable, or, and they need more emergency funds. So shoring those things up, making sure your credit cards are paid off. So if, God forbid, you need to use them, you've got plenty of space on them. Those are the things that you want to make sure you're doing. And so it's just like tidying up. It's not getting totally out of the market. We'll be talking, our next section that we're going to go over the new tax law and opportunities. And so those are other things that you should be looking at too.
Would you like another question right now, or should we move on?
Sure, let's take another question.
All right, great. The market's volatility still seems high or irrational. What are you seeing short term and for the next 5 years?
So just so you know, I left my magic 8 ball at the office. I am not any more prescient about the short term, what's going to happen, than the next person. So I try to have people, if they think they're going to need the money, I think you all need an emergency fund or a triple whammy fund, that should be in conservative stuff. And then the long term, I think, is a good outlet. If I were to guess, but let's say we're playing a parlay game and I'm going to guess. I actually am I'm preparing myself for the market to go down more, because although it's been, really up and down, right now it's about where it was a year ago. I mean, it's gone down, 15% or something, but the economy, there's so much uncertainty that it's kind of surprising to me that it hasn't been down a little bit more. So, or that it's come back up as much as it has. So I am preparing myself for it to go down more. I was last year talking to clients about, I think that sooner or later the stock market's going to go down. And so I actually wouldn't be surprised if it goes down some more. And then it'll climb back up. what it generally does. So I also think that the political reaction isn't that bad as far as, they're getting money into the economy. The economists kind of all agree that it makes a lot of sense to try to avoid getting into a depression, and trying to pump more money into the economy to avoid a major to try to mitigate the downturn is the best way to go. So I think probably that's what the markets are thinking. But I was never that good at figuring out trends in the high school hallways. And I think of the stock market as kind of like a big high school hallway of people that are very into trends and looking at each other and acting based on what they think other people are thinking. And it can be frustrating if you try to base your self-worth on that. So I try to kind of notice it, but then let it go.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That paints a really great picture. I haven't thought about it that way before.
All right, so we'll have more time for more questions later. Let's move on to the PPP and taxes. Okay, so tax and other opportunities, right? The next one, I think it might give you a headache, so watch out. Okay, here we go. This is give everybody a headache slide, but it's really not that bad, I don't think. So the first over here, this has already happened for most people. These are the stimulus checks. So these stimulus checks, so I'm going over this whole thing because there's some elements to this that haven't been widely reported, and I want to make sure people know about it, okay? So stimulus checks, you should have gotten one if you're going to get one. If you have Social Security, they're supposed to still show up to where your Social Security is coming from. This is all going to be trued out in your 2020 tax return. So if you didn't get one and you don't get a recovery rebate, and it's because it didn't, like your 2019 income was too high for it to get triggered, or your 2018 income was too high, you will still get that when you do your 2020 tax return. Okay, here. So this is if you take money from IRAs or 401ks, because it's coronavirus related, you won't pay an extra penalty on a distribution of up to $100,000. And you don't, there's also, it won't be subject to mandatory withholding requirements, and it can be paid back in 3 years, and the tax can be, the income can be spread over 3 years too. So you remember when I was mentioning that triple whammy fund, you could put your triple whammy fund in your 401k. This is kind of one of the reasons is because A, it makes it less likely that you'll use it just to go buy a car, but also B, another reason is because when one of the things that triggers triple whammies are natural disasters. And often with natural disasters comes specific relief from taking money from 401ks, because that's what people really do. When there's a disaster, especially people with smaller balances in their 401ks, a lot of people cash them out. So I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, but it is reality. And so because it's reality, it's nice that they have these special provision. Other provisions are required minimum distributions. So these are for people that are over 70 and a half under the old rules, under the new secure rules, which just came into play in 2020, but now it'll be 2021. You don't have to take RMDs, and if you have RMDs, you can return them. All right, this one is a little bit obscure about 5-year rule for non-designated beneficiaries. This one is more of a meaning one. There's a 300, it's called the buzzer line deduction for qualified charitable contributions. So that means that everybody, if you itemize or not, can deduct $300 for charitable contributions if you make those. So that is awesome. Student loan deferments, payments can be deferred, and employers can exclude student loan repayments from compensation. And then unemployment has gotten bumped up by another $600 a week, and there was a waiting period that got eliminated. Oops. And then we get to PPP, or sorry about that. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail because it's getting so widely reported. So these first two, the first one is about PPP, such loans are forgivable, and then there's a payroll tax credit for qualified business not receiving one of these. And then employers are eligible to defer payroll taxes through the end of the year. That would be something that I wouldn't recommend. That's just based on my experience, but I guess there will be some people that use that. If they know that they're getting more money later, that could work. Okay.
And Bridget,
so
for those of us who don't
go
know, could you explain? Okay, you're answering my question with the next slide.
Next slide, payroll protection. Yeah, I wanted to get into that in a little more detail. It's been so widely reported on. And I wanted to give people an explanation for what's going on, kind of how to think about it. So who qualifies? You have to have payroll. That means that you're taking tax out and filing W-2s for employees. Or if you don't have payroll, you have to show income on a Schedule C on your 1040 in 2019. Okay, I'm going to switch to the next slide. Okay, so here is a Schedule C that shows that you have income on your Schedule C. Okay, so that's who's eligible. And then if you have one of those two things and you get one of those loans, it's forgivable if you use it for payroll and some other, mainly for payroll, and then there's some other 75% for payroll and then others for rent, etc. And it's probably because of these it probably wouldn't work for people if you're closed by the order of the governor as far as being forgiven. It still might be an attractive loan, but you'd have to pay it back. But there are other loans for those businesses, for instance, the EIDL, which is it's an emergency loan. And those, they're eligible for some tax credits. They aren't they're a little different than the widely reported PPP. We did get a question about, is an LLC eligible? So remember who qualifies. Remember, an LLC, it depends on what the LLC is doing. An LLC can be it should be shown on a Schedule C, actually. It can be have a payroll, or it can be have a piece of property that's a rental property. So rental property would not qualify. You've got to have one of these types of things. So a rental property is not shown on the Schedule C, it's shown on the Schedule E. And so you would not qualify if you're Schedule E, but you could qualify if you're Schedule C. And again, you have income. All right. So let's talk about what the problems are with it, okay? We have 3 different organizations all trying to work together, right? We have the small businesses, we have banks, and we have the SBA. We also are the Small Business Administration. Remember that this is a new program. So they set it up so that the banks are the point of entry for everybody. So everybody's got to go to a bank. And then the bank is coordinates with the SBA, right? So banks' interests are not totally aligned with the small business interests, right? And so what a bank cares about is they want documentation. They want to get paid back. Banks are banks. They're trying to get paid back. That's how they make their money. And so they generally, as far as loans go, are risk adverse. They want to get paid back. So The other thing is that they naturally are prioritizing their current customers. They aren't not-for-profit organizations. They want to make money, and so they are prioritize their current customers, starting with, and again, even then they have their own priorities, starting with customers that already have SBA loans, because obviously it would be easier to put those through, and people that have loans in general, and then business customers. All those three things are first. And then so sole proprietors don't necessarily have to, if you're filing one of these, you don't necessarily need to have a business bank account or a separate bank account. You can run this pretty informally just off of your own bank account. So going to the bank and trying to get a loan, that's just going to make it that much harder. So, and the specific documentation, okay, so documenting all your payroll, that's there's a lot of small businesses that they have no idea what the forms are that the SBA and their banks are asking for. Or, they don't know if they have this Schedule C or not, or what it might say. So it's not, when you look at the statistic I heard was that there's 30 million small businesses, but a lot of them are pretty small operations and run fairly informally. So that's going to make it harder for banks and harder for the SBA. And it's going to end up favoring the more well-organized, connected situations. Now, or the more well-organized, connected small businesses. Now, I think that they're trying to eliminate publicly traded companies, like woo. And it was supposed to be that you had less than 500 employees in the first place. So I don't know how they got in there. But some, there's some well-known companies that actually don't have that many employees. So, and some of these food places that I've heard about, it's within the realm of possibility that they don't have that many employees because they might have mainly franchises. So all the franchisees own their own company. So it's hard for me to exactly understand, although I think more information will be coming out about it. I know the second round of funding prioritized smaller banks. So back to the savings accounts, if you have a small business, it makes a lot of sense to me to use a local bank for your business banking and or savings account, at least one of them, because of this type of thing. So because the big banks tend to not care. I mean, the smaller banks, the smaller and regional banks, that's what they're set up to do, is to try to help the local businesses. Not to say that they always do that or that they're big enough to be able to do a decent amount of SBA lending, but it's that I'm just trying to answer those questions as best I can. All right, Q&A with Luke. Go ahead. Any PPP questions?
Absolutely. First one, I run a nonprofit and we're applying for PPP. Can we put in applications with more than one lender? At what point in the process would we need to stop moving forward if we're doing it with multiple lenders?
Yes, you can. From what I understand, that's not actually a bad idea, and that the SBA will only process one. So the first one that gets in, then everything else will stop. So once you actually are filing, once you're in and you're filing your paperwork with the PPP, like you get the sign these documents official, that's when the other ones will stop, and you would want to notify them so they can stop the application. But you should not be, that your account should be flagged, and you should not get it at that point.
All right, great. Next one. How does PPP work for sole proprietorships?
So proprietorships are this situation, right? So as far as I understand, you'd take this line 31, whatever it said, and you'd multiply it by some amount. So say it's right around 20%. The bank application will give you the exact amount. And that's what you'd apply for. And then you have to show that you use it. Again, this is your payroll. It's just you. Unless there's some times that you have, some people have payrolls, but I would say most of the time on a Schedule C, you don't have a payroll. So if you use this for you, they'll have requirements that you will need to comply with to show that you that that forgiveness is okay, and that is still an open question to my mind. It's been a little vague, especially, and I would especially say that with the sole proprietorships. So if I were me, I'd want to ask a couple questions about the forgiveness if I was depending on forgiveness.
That makes sense. Next.
When I make the application.
How difficult is it to actually receive the funding?
Well, it's definitely a squeaky wheel situation from what I've heard. So that means check in with your bank, get on it now. If you haven't heard, bug them. It just depends. And you have to, some banks are kind of stopped doing it. I've heard particularly Chase is problematic. You can apply to more than one, through more than one outfit, but obviously if your bank is doing it, you're going to be in a better situation, hopefully.
All right, and the last one.
The other thing is that you want to be organized. You want to be, I would say you want to be organized with your documents.
Last one for now. Since EIDL funds are diminished, do we think there is an opportunity for those funds to be replenished? If so, where can I find an application?
That one stumps me. So we'll need to get back to that person on that.
All right, great. Instead, I will ask you a different one.
Okay, go ahead.
Next one on the list. Can I receive payroll protection if I am getting commission checks?
So that's a really good one. So we have, it depends on how you're getting your commission checks. So if you're getting your commission checks 1099 and then it shows up and you have a Schedule C, then yes, you can. If you're getting, and I would just say period. If your commission checks come through a W-2 and they've severed their relationship, you're no longer working there, then you would be eligible. As far as I'm concerned, you could apply for unemployment.
All right, thank you. Let's move on.
Okay. All right, other opportunities, refinance. If you can get, you might, so back to our your net worth statement, now is a good time to refinance if you feel like you can get a better interest rate, which you might be able to do. The interest rates are low. Keep applying money into your investments, not necessarily more, but just consistently, what you've always been doing. Tax loss harvesting. So with tax loss harvesting, that's applicable to taxable accounts. So it's not applicable to IRAs or 401ks or Roth accounts. So you got a taxable account, so you've saved money or maybe you inherited money and it's just sitting there in a regular account that you pay a tax on every year. Sometimes you get you've gotten stocks from your employer. So what tax loss harvesting does is, and it's lost money, so it's gone down. But you want to keep it you're basically thinking, okay, I want to keep this money invested, but it happens to have gone down to more than you paid for it at this point. So what tax loss harvesting does is you sell it now, and then you buy back something that's similar but not exactly the same, and then you get that loss on your tax return up to $3,000 a year, and anything over $3,000 gets carried forward to the next year. So you get the loss now, and then you reinvest the money in the stock market, and that's what tax loss harvesting is. We're going to be doing that with clients as soon as our volatility reaches the rate that we're expecting it to in the next few days. Retired, still taking some dollars from an IRA. So another thing that we do a lot with clients is, say if you're in the 12% tax return or tax bracket, and you're retired, we max it out to the top of the 12% bracket if we know that later you're going to be in the 22% bracket, because then you can take more of it now, maybe a little more money than you need, but you will be paying at a lower tax rate than later. The other thing I like to do is talk about meaning and how you can increase. We talked a little bit before about increasing your happiness, your feeling of happiness, just with having an adequate savings account. With meaning, there's a few ways in times like now you can increase your sense of meaning and purpose in life. First is take care of yourself, and one way you can do that is develop your action plan for your finances. Take care of your relationships, so you can help other people with their action plan or act as a sounding board, just listening. Develop yourself, another great way to find more meaning, and give. Even small things or small amounts of money works for, as well as large amounts of money, for what the donators call the warm glow of giving. So when you feel good about giving, they actually call that the warm glow, which is I think, a very evocative phrase. And just giving a little gives you that a good feeling, again, increases your feelings of happiness and harmony. Okay, so make a plan. Look at the fundamentals of your finance. Think about, should you change anything? If you want to change anything, ask yourself a few questions. Have you tried this before? How does it work? There's a risk that this time is the same. Sometimes people think this time is different than every other time there's been a market downturn. This is uniquely bad. But they discount the risk that it's the same. Well, but what if it's the same? There's a larger chance that it's really the same as everything else has been. And you can discount that risk. Here's an example action plan if your level is high. Look at my overall net worth as of now. Make sure my savings accounts and triple whammy are fully funded. Pay off credit cards. Figure out who I can talk to. Stop watching the news. And then I've got my Ted Turner trick to sleep at night, which is Ted Turner talked about when he went through the AOL merger, how he was having trouble sleeping at night, and he just started thinking through the names of all his children and grandchildren and their spouses and etc., and just thought about each one for a second when he was stressed out. I found that works great. Example of the action plan if your fear level is medium. Look at my overall net worth as of now. Make sure my savings accounts and triple whammy are fully funded. Pay off credit cards. Invest more if that's appropriate. Tax loss harvest if that's appropriate. That's the meaning. Start the strategy session. We'll talk about that in a second if you've got more questions. Action plan if your fear level is low. Make sure my savings account and triple whammy are fully funded. Make sure I'm saving 10% of my income. Refinance my mortgage. Pay off credit cards. Invest more if appropriate. Tax loss harvest appropriate. And add some meaning. Shameless self-promotion department. We offer what's called strategy sessions. It's a 90-minute session where you go over your 3 biggest questions. Good questions now would be, it costs $1,495, just so you know. Good questions now would be, and there's a 30-day follow-up period. So if you've need clarification on what we went over, we've got 30 days to go back and forth on it. Good questions now. Can you check my investments? Can I retire at whatever age? I just retired. Do I need to get a job? How can I make best use of my current situation? So those are just a few different ideas. Luke, lay it on me.
All right. So the first question of sort of the other questions that didn't fit in the initial periods. What are the tax implications if I move to a different state from my employer?
So typically look at your pay stub and see if they've changed your withholding. And I usually just follow the pay stub. And if your employer starts changing the withholding and starts withholding for the different states, then you'll need to file in that state. If they don't, I personally follow the pay stub, and I don't typically try to be proactive with other states if my employer isn't doing that. One other thing too is that if you move, there used to be the moving expenses used to be deductible years ago, but if you end up moving and they pay for the move, or you pay for the move, whoever pays for the move, it's not a deductible expense for you anymore. So the more you can have the employer pay, the better off you are.
All right. Next one. How are advisors like you addressing COVID concerns?
So let's see. Just so you know, now we are at 6 o'clock, and so we're gonna wrap it up. Just so you know, I'm gonna answer this question, and we're gonna stick around for another 10 minutes or so. I just wanted to thank everybody that's been on. If I don't get a chance to thank you, if you got to pop off. But I'm going to keep answering some questions and see if we've got even more questions, the ones I can't answer. Or if you get a stump me, that's fine too. But I just want to make sure I say thank you, everybody, for participating. And if you've got any comments, we really appreciate them about how you felt about how the webinar went. We really appreciate you hearing from you. And you can email Luke at luke@sullivanmermel.com. Okay, so COVID concerns. So first of all, there's a bunch of different ways that we're looking at it. There's how we are looking at it personally, and then how we're looking at it for our clients, and then how we're looking at it as a business. So personally, obviously, we need to keep track of our own health and make sure that our business plans are in order. With clients, we're just trying to do a lot of outreach. And again, the same thing, it's an interesting conundrum because it hits people on both a personal health level and a financial level and a relative level, because a lot of our clients, we have a lot of clients who are retired, but then there's a lot of clients who have people who care about that are older too. So, and that can be stressful just to have be worried about people who are older. So we try to just address all concerns differently. Obviously, we're not health professionals, but it's a really interesting crisis because it's all working together. People's mental health, their physical health, and their financial health. It's interesting because it's a crisis that we just have to try to address all of it.
Absolutely. Next, I am hearing so many different answers from different sources. Who can I trust?
It just depends on what the question is. Because you want to consider your source and consider where your source is getting their information. So that's one of the reasons why I tried to give up my source information like Burt Whitehead and where my lineage is of thinking on financial planning. Consider the source and consider your own experience and trust yourself. That's what I would say. You're the one that's ultimately making the decision. So you want to make sure that you're comfortable with what you're doing.
All right. Next, what are some good rules of thumb for consolidating my portfolio of IRAs, mutual funds, former 401ks, etc.?
You know, a lot of times when clients come to us, one of the big things that we end up doing is helping them consolidate things. And usually what we're trying to do is help them simplify. So one, IRA or 401k is just fine. Usually, I try to get everything in as few accounts as possible. And then, one large company fund or large company value fund, one international fund, one emerging markets fund. The research shows that having multiple funds with kind of the same stuff in them, it's just a lot of overlap and it doesn't really add a lot of value. So keeping it simple is just fine.
That makes sense. Next, what do I do with my investments? Stay in the market or run?
Well, it goes back to the 15-year. If you think, stay in the market with the money that you don't need for 15 years, and put the money in a savings account or under your mattress or in gold and ammo, if you're for the stuff that you want to run with. But if you are going to run with your gold, you want to get like coins or something. It's heavy. That's the problem with running with gold. It's like, how much of it can you really carry? And like, you're not going to be able to cash in a gold block, So, yeah, you got to think it all through.
And finally, what can I do with my taxes to best take advantage of the current situation?
It's hard to give general advice on that. It's easier if I see someone's specific situation. The things that, so if you're, it sounds like everybody, if you give away $300, you'll be able to deduct it. That's awesome. And so if you're inclined to give away $300, then that's a good thing to do. It's hard for me to give one-size-fits-all tax advice.
All right, that makes sense.
People's situations are so different. That's a hard one.
All right.
And the other thing is that I think during this session we've given a lot of different examples of things that you could do in different situations. So I feel like we've covered it. With that tax loss harvesting in certain situations, if you have to take money out of your 401k, put it in back over 3 years, etc.
All right. Well, I think that covers all the questions that I have on my list. Obviously, we grouped some of the questions together that were similar. So if you feel like you didn't have your question answered, again, we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, that's all that's on my list.
Great. Thanks, Luke. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you too, Bridget.
Bye-bye. Okay. Bye-bye.